Tat. For this reason. Adya. From this day. Na. Upon us. Papam. Reaction of sin. Upaiti. Will overtake. Ananvayam. Disruption. Yat. Because. Nashta. Abolished. Nathasya. Of the monarch. Vaso. Of wealth. Vilumpakat. Being plundered. Parasparam. Between one another. Ganante. Will kill. Shapante. Will do harm. Vrinjate. Will steal. Pashun. Animals. Striya. Women. Artan. Riches. Puro. Greatly. Dasyava. Thieves. Jana. The mass of people. Translation. Due to the termination of the monarchical regimes and the plundering of the people's wealth by rogues and thieves, there will be great social disruptions. People will be killed and injured, and animals and women will be stolen. And for all these sins, we shall be responsible. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The word na, we, is very significant in this verse. The sage rightly takes the responsibility of the Brahmins as a community for killing monarchical government and thus giving an opportunity to the so-called democrats, who are generally plunderers of the wealth of the state, subjects. The so-called democrats capture the administrative machine without assuming responsibility for the prosperous condition of the citizens. Everyone captures the post for personal gratification, and thus, instead of one king, a number of irresponsible kings grow up to tax the citizens. It is foretold herein that in the absence of good monarchical government, everyone will be the cause of disturbance for others by plundering riches, animals, women, etc. Tadadyana papam upajyanan vayam yanashtanatasya vasor vilumpakat parasparam gananti shapanti vrinjate pashunstri artan purudasya vojana. Due to the termination of the monarchical regimes and the plundering of the people's wealth by rogues and thieves, there will be great social disruptions. People will be killed and injured, and animals and women will be stolen. And for all these sins, we shall be responsible. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Shatarne Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpatrulibhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha. Patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Hare Krishna. As we said, we were informed it's the previous verse, but it's all right. Yes, so This is a sequence, a series of verses spoken by Shamaka Rishi, the father of Shringi, the Brahmin, young Brahmin boy who cursed Maharaj Parikshit to die in a week by the bite of a snake bird. It's interesting in and of itself to some degree. He didn't just curse him to die, just drop dead on the spot. It would appear that he could have. He had that sort of Shakti. It doesn't seem that he had to sort of make the curse and then build up some strength for a week and then it would come to that point. It seems that he had that strength already. But anyway, somehow or other, we're not really aware why. But he cursed him to die within a week. Well, perhaps at least it was the arrangement of the Lord so that Maharaj Parikshit could hear Srimad Bhagavatam from Shukadev Goswami. Certainly that's what happened, and that was extremely important. But anyway, there's this sequence of verses spoken by Shamaka Rishi, who is the father of that immature and not well-educated and not knowledgeable enough, this young boy Shringi. And Shamaka Rishi is lamenting in these verses in different ways, different things that go wrong when such a situation occurs where the king, the monarch, somehow dies and there's no one to take over. Actually there was someone to take over and someone did take over, but in situations where there is not anyone to take over, then the lower nature in this material world, the lower nature is just so extremely powerful that so many people, when in such a situation where law and order breaks down, like in this case where the king is killed and if there isn't anyone to take over, or even we see nowadays that where they have catastrophes in cities, that it seems to happen every single time, that there is looting and all this sort of thing, breaking into the shops and just stealing things. And it really happens on quite a scale. Although it's obviously totally illegal, but many people do this. Yes, so this lower tendency is there. It's really quite amazing, actually. It's really quite amazing. So of course here what's being emphasized is that you need a king. Nowadays we have democracy, as Srila Prabhupada sometimes said, demon crazy. Unfortunately, though, what happened before the time of Cromwell and people like that who were the original Democrats, the early Democrats, before that you had monarchical systems. From what we understand, it was just basically the universal way. That's how things were run, just all over the world. To our knowledge, in practically, if not actually, literally, every society, there was some form of monarchical system, and when the monarch either died or reached some age late in life, where he felt he was not able to carry on, he would hand it over to usually the eldest son, usually, or at least one of the sons, or at least one of the children. If there were no sons, it would be handed over often to a daughter. And if there were no sons or daughters, then like the brother or the children of the brother, something like this, along these lines. This is how it was working. Unfortunately, due to the influence of Kali Yuga, that system sort of fell down in the sense that the kings did exactly what it is being said here would happen when there is no king and you have some other system functioning, that the kings became more or less like plunderers, and they lived extremely opulently, while the common people, particularly like the laborer caste, the real working class, they were just left to somehow survive on a pittance, or even less than a pittance. It was bad. You know, just before the French Revolution, it was like that. And was it Anne Boleyn, or it was one of the last of that group who were the ruling class? The people in Paris, I think in Paris or somewhere in France, they were all gathering together in front of the palace and just, you know, we want food. They just couldn't get food. We want bread. And so someone came and reported to whoever it was, it may have been Marie Antoinette, all right. The people, you know, they're just rioting. They're just really upset because they have no bread. And she said, well, then let them eat cake. Which, you know, is quite a step up from bread. So it's just such an abusive and offensive mentality. But that's what it was like. That's what it was like. But back in, you know, the good old days, so to speak, like these days of Maharaj Parikshit and what we call the Vedic times, the monarchy, of course, they lived an opulent life. They lived the most opulent life of all, even more than the business class or agricultural productive class, the Vaishyas. The Kshatriyas, the monarchs, they lived in great opulence. It's a fact. With great facility, but not through abusing the people. Prabhupada explains that the Vedic system was that people who were producing and earning in like particularly the Vaishyas themselves, they had to pay 25%. It was a flat tax, and it was just 25%, and that was all it was. And the rest they just could live on as they wanted. But through that system, the Kshatriyas were able to live very opulent lives. And which, you know, the argument or the idea is that the king has to have a sort of what would you say, a presence, a very substantial presence in front of everyone to maintain control. if he simply lives like everybody else, then people will not be impressed, people will not respect, and definitely people will not have, there won't be the element of fear. So some sort of very substantial material presence of facility and things like an army and a police force, these sorts of things were there. And in this way, the king was able to live an extremely comfortable life, but maintain control for the good of the people. There's a saying, a lock keeps an honest man honest. And it's just the same idea we mentioned just some minutes ago, that the lower nature is so powerful. It's so powerful that unless there's some way that it's kept really in check, it will just come pouring out. It'll just overflow the individual, and they'll just be swept by their lusty lower nature into doing all sorts of wrong things. In Srimad Bhagavatam, the example is there that when King Anga, I think it was Anga, when he, was it King Anga? Yeah, was it King Anga? Passed away, and there was no.
He left.
He left.
He deserted his kingdom.
Okay, and then his son, Vena, his son Vena took over. So it's the hereditary system, but that Vena was like a first-class demon. Very, very heavy demon. The description there, that's the 4th canto. The description there is that as a child, when he would play the typical childish games that young boys play, cops and robbers and all this sort of thing, then, I think so many of us have played those games, bang, bang, you're dead, and all that sort of thing. He would actually kill the other children. Yeah. So, sure. And he thought it was just great. It was fun because that he had that lower nature, very powerful lower nature, although he was also very powerful. So then he maintained law and order in a ruthless way. There was no crime. It was just unheard of. Because if anyone was caught stealing even something like an apple or something like that, they'd be killed. So, but then he himself, he was an atheist, and he installed or established laws for everyone to worship him. And it became illegal to not worship the king. And the punishment was also just instant death. So he got so carried away that even though he was maintaining law and order and there was no crime, but the Brahmins, the intellectual class, the thinkers, they could see that we cannot carry on like this. He has to be stopped. So they killed him. by curse. It says by sharp words. Just means they cursed him and he just dropped dead like that. So, but then there was a period of time following Vena when there was no king, because he had no son, and for whatever reason there was no king. And what happened was that crime just exploded. It just exploded. And that was in Vedic times. It was not a Kali Yuga. It was some other age when people are essentially much more pious and much less inclined to dishonesty and abuse and exploitation, etc. But still, it says the criminals were so active. There were so many, and they were racing around so much, doing so much criminal activity, that there was like a dust storm kicked up by their feet, because they're just running around so much, doing their criminal business. It was just completely shocking. Actually, it seems it was worse than now. Yeah. It was worse than now. So then, that's a bit of a long story, but Maharaj Prithu appeared. That's a bit of a long story, but he appeared and he put things right, basically. So, but in principle, this is the problem, that unless there is a strong, not just strong, although it definitely has to really be strong, government, but it has to be God conscious and actually qualified spiritually and in terms of personal qualities of character, in the mode of goodness. Unless you've got a rule like that, then crime just takes over. Just like here in South Africa, perhaps we shouldn't even say it, but previously there was a sort of a strong government in a certain sense. But then they got replaced, as they should have been, they got replaced by in that sense, a very weak government, unfortunately. And as a result, well, anyway, you know as well as me, I think you know better than me, what's going on. There has been an explosion, and it's ongoing, of crime and abuse, and it's a sad scene. Even though in certain respects, it's certainly better. So, yes. So, what happens though, it's like Prabhupada is almost sort of having a premonition of what's going to happen in South Africa, that certain people take over, and but then they start abusing and exploiting. This is what we hear, at least, that the previous state president, he managed to do quite well, apparently. Yes. In Russia, where I go quite a bit, if you go to almost any city, many cities, if you want to find out who is the most wealthy person, it's the mayor. Because the mayors there, they actually have political control. They're like sort of the president of the city, kind of independent, at least in many ways, from the central government. And they're actually running the city. And, well, like we said, usually they're the most wealthy people in their cities because, cleverly, they're not stupid usually, cleverly they're able to find ways of extracting money without other people knowing, and by paying off the people who might know, the accountants, city accountants and all that. And they all do very well, thank you. They really do. We, in Moscow, about 10 years ago or something, we wanted to get some land from the city government. And there was a set fee. It was $250,000. And that was just for the mayor. Just unofficially. You must give them $250,000. Then later we found out now it's gone up to $700,000. It's doing well. But as Kali Yuga goes on, the idea here, and it's presented further like in the 12th canto where there are descriptions of Kali Yuga, how things develop as Kali Yuga progresses, then it becomes more blatant, becomes much more blatant, that people just get literally thrown off their land just gets taken away from them, and there's no attempt at being subtle or anything like that at all. And so they become literally plunderers. It's already happening in some places. Yeah. In Kazakhstan, our ISKCON lost some very nice land, which we had quite legally acquired, because the sister of the president of the country wanted it. And that's what happened, and it happened. And we've still got one little part where the devotees had built a temple, but the rest of the land's gone. So, yes. So, of course, the Democrats, it's not really for us to get into all sorts of governmental considerations and all this sort of thing, but certain elements of the picture Prabhupada addresses sometimes, like here, that the monarchs, at least so many of them, I don't know if it was all of them, but many of them, they sort of fell down and they became exploited. In Russia, the last Tsar, and many of the Tsars before him, they just became so abusive and exploitative. Is just completely crazy, completely ludicrous. And eventually it became too much. As the saying goes, revolution can only happen when the people find that living is worse than dying. When living becomes worse than dying, then you'll have revolution. At least in so many cases. And it just became like that. Just too painful to live. So then they took over. But like when the democracy, when Cromwell, as I recall, Shri Nitai Mayapur Chandra Ki Jai. When Cromwell, who was the original Democrat in England, when Cromwell took over, after a while, he wanted to become king. Yeah, he actually wanted to become installed as the king and be crowned. Yeah, so, it's a hard road in this material world. Yes, so it's a fact that the monarchs didn't deserve to live, to rule, And the idea of democracy, it's a sort of clever idea. It's a clever idea. If the majority are pleased, then society should be more or less manageable. If a minority are ruling and sort of taking advantage to some degree, then it may not work because there's more in the majority. Prabhupada told a little, not exactly a story, but just a little kind of idea that there were two nations. One was very big and kind of brutal and non-democratic. The other was considerably smaller, but the people were much more intelligent. And they had a democracy where they all decided what would happen. And one day, the people, the army from the big, more brutal, monarchical country invaded. And the people, the intelligent people in the smaller democratic country said, wait a minute, you can't do this. We're a democracy. We have not voted that you can take us over. And the other guy said, well, listen, there's more of us. So it's already a democratic decision. We have decided, and there's more of us. Yeah. So like this, otherwise, through monarchy, they have to keep control through violence. Yeah. They have to keep control through violence. But in a democracy, the majority have control. So when the majority are happy, then if the minority get upset, then, usually you can deal with them. So like this, democracy, clever creation. But unfortunately, as we see now, at least as we hear now, abuse happens so much. And as is stated later in the Bhagavatam, that the rulers become so abusive, exploitative, and just they plunder so much that many of the common people just give up and they just leave and just go as far away as they can into the mountains and just try to subsist. But, if you've ever done agriculture, you would know that living off the land is not easy. You don't just go and live off the land. You've really got to know how to do it. To farm, you've got to know how to do it. And if you don't know, you die. Yeah, and so this is what happens. People, out of frustration, just leave the cities and just go anywhere, as far away as possible, just to get away from the government. But then they can't look after themselves. Yeah, and they end up living like animals. So it's Kali Yuga. And, it's amazing how you could say prophetic Srimad Bhagavatam is and Srila Prabhupada. How they state that this type of thing will happen, this type of thing will happen as Kali Yuga progresses, and we see it's actually happening, in fact, already, at least starting to happen more and more. These famous African presidents in other African nations, president for the last 30 years or something like that, Mr. Mugabe and his pals. Well, it's Kali Yuga, Haribol. So the only answer is really ultimately Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada, of course, makes the point in the purport, and it's a very important point, as he says, that Shamaka Rishi is saying that we, the Brahmins, as a class, as a group in society, we're actually responsible for this. It's not just this boy, somehow he had some power, but because he was just, uncultured and uneducated, he misused his power, and that's the problem. He's the problem. But he's saying that the Brahminical class is the problem, because how is it this boy was like that? It was because he was not properly brought up, trained and educated, as they were in the past. They would never, the young Brahmin boys would never do such a thing at all. And it's not just the parents' fault. It's not just the fault of the teachers at school or the education department of the government. It's just the fault of everyone, of the whole class, the whole group, that they have failed to bring up their children properly, and it's manifesting in this one case. Doesn't mean he was the only case, but it manifests. He was like the first one where it showed itself so dramatically, that lack of proper training by the adults to the children in general in their community. So it's an interesting consideration, and it also to some degree can be applied in our communities like ISKCON Cape Town, actually. Sometimes somebody goes off track in this way or that. Even sometimes somebody who's kind of in some sort of fairly central role. It happens occasionally. And what to speak in amongst those who are little more peripheral, but still in the community of devotees, that people go off track and different things happen and have happened. And it's very easy to say, well, he's got a problem, she's got a problem. It's their problem, they're the problem. But it's not entirely like that. You can't just divorce all the members of the community from the community. Our philosophy is Achintya Bhed, Abhed Tattva, that Bhed means difference. There's difference. We are individuals. We have our own lives. But at the same time, there's Abhed. There's non-difference. We, the Hare Krishna movement in Cape Town or anywhere, we are one, actually. Although we're also individuals at the same time. So there's definitely a type of collective responsibility. And when, not if, but when someone does go off track, then every one of us, at least it may be just to a small degree depending on our role, but actually every one of us has some degree of responsibility. Yeah. Sorry to say that. I hope I'm not disappointing anyone too much, but that's just the way it is. It really is. It's just the way it is. Shastrically, and you can just observe. You can just observe that when things happen, there are sort of ripples through the community. Yeah. And sometimes they're more than just ripples. So therefore the Brahmins means the Vaishnavas, particularly at this point in time, have such a responsibility, first of all, to maintain standards personally. That's your sort of, as in your different, your personal capacity, the first thing you must do is maintain your spiritual standards. If you can't do that, then no matter how good you are at other things, there's going to be this deep flaw running through your life and your situation. So yes, we have to maintain our spiritual standards. And then the next thing is try and spread that. Try and spread Krishna consciousness and help others to come up. Well, help each other and help others to come up and in this way develop the Krishna consciousness movement. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki. Any comment or question? Madhavi Prabhu, you want to add, subtract?
I interpreted when it was Sanika Rishi speaking, yes, that we are responsible. I thought the we was him and his son, if you know what I mean. But you're expanding that. I mean, how is it that, such a powerful boy was let loose? And Sanika Rishi is quoted as being the well-known Sanika Rishi.
Yeah, sure.
He obviously was, a good Brahmana.
Yeah.
So where do we say the fault is?
Well, first of all, it was right there. First of all, it was right there. But as Prabhupada says, the word we is very significant in this verse. The sage rightly takes the responsibility of the Brahmins as a community. Yeah. So immediately, he's the father. He has an immediate responsibility. But in another sense, his failing is a reflection of the general failing, which has somehow infiltrated the Brahminical community. And therefore, as a community, they have killed the monarchical government, or killing. But right then and there, of course, he has the immediate responsibility, because the child is the responsibility of the parents. Although the child is the responsibility of the village also. It takes a village to bring up a child, not just a family. But the immediate responsibilities are certainly in the hands of the family.
Morris, do we have any reference from the past to who Srini was, or in the future what happened in...
Not that I'm aware of. But there's mention somewhere, I forget where, that that many of the soldiers who died in the Battle of Kurukshetra had been Brahmins in their previous lives. Is that it?
They would take birth as Brahmins in Kali Yuga.
Oh, they would take birth as Brahmins, that's right. In Kali Yuga. So, they're coming from Kshatriya backgrounds, plus many of them are somewhat degraded as Kshatriyas already. And now they're going to be born in Brahmin families with, an already degraded type of consciousness. Yeah. Yes, Jyoti.
Prabhupada was looking at ISKCON for the future of society to transport some knowledge about how the future government or the structural model should work.
Right.
In Vedic times, you see the fault of the monarchy, breakdown of that, and in modern times we see the breakdown of democracy.
Right.
Where should we lead? What should we lead in the because if it doesn't work, monarchy doesn't work, and democracy doesn't work, what is the future? How does ISKCON preach? What do we preach then?
Yeah, well, we would preach a God-centered government. Prabhupada did make the point that we are not exactly trying to establish monarchies. It's not like we have a program for that. But we would like to become able to influence governments to be God-centered. There are a few places where devotees, like in Hungary, the devotees have taken over the government of the sort of the immediate district of the village, and where they're main farmers, and they are the main people in the very local government. But our idea, as I understand it, ourselves as practitioners, trying to be serious practitioners, we should try to become Brahmins. And a Brahmin would not become usually a hands-on manager of governmental functions in a country or a city, but would guide those who would be doing that. And therefore we need to keep preaching Krishna consciousness, and preach more, actually. We really need to preach more. Although it takes time, it seems. It really takes time. Is that an answer of some sort? Yeah.
What was Prabhupada's vision for the future? I mean, he was looking at longer than just now, like the near future, the distant future. What is our position then?
Well, then, you mean in terms of government?
No, in terms of Varnashram, he had this idea, this unifying vision of some type of system. How does that play into...
Well, through Krishna consciousness, people who are not going to become full-time devotees or Brahmins would continue working in fields they feel naturally inclined towards, but in God consciousness, in Krishna consciousness. And that would be Varnashram. Prabhupada did say, the Kshatriyas are already there. The Vaishyas are already there. The Sudras are definitely already there. But there's no head. There's no proper Brahminical order. And therefore those who are trying to do the ruling, they are just, they just cannot do it well at all. And eventually they all get kicked out. Previously, if the ruler got kicked out, there was a revolution, and normally they'd kick him out, they'd kill him, or else he'd have to run and escape to some other country. But now, through democracy, you don't have to do that. You can kick a person out just by sort of manipulating people to vote in certain ways. So that's what Prabhupada wanted, that a proper Brahminical order which becomes able to influence the existing people who are already doing Sudra work, already doing business, doing agriculture, and already trying to do some sort of government. That's my understanding. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki.